Let's talk about population post-COVID. Of course, immigration has stopped during this pandemic. No immigration over the past year. Let's catch up with the contributing economics editor to The Australian, Judith Sloan. Good to talk to you again, Judith. You've written about this. You always poke holes in the economic arguments of the big Australia crowd, and you're suggesting we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry to rush back to high levels of immigration. Why?
Well, good evening, Chris. Yes, I mean, it is one of my topics. As you know, columnists have a series of favourite topics, and this is one. And of course, you build up quite an expertise in this. So there were two reasons I wrote this column this morning. Was that one, the Treasury implicitly gave the game away. They released what's called a population statement. They did that at the end of the year, last year. And it shows that Treasury expects the immigration levels to basically return to what they were pre-COVID. So we're talking about net overseas migration. So those are people coming in for a long time, minus those going out for a long time. It was about 200 to 250,000 persons per year, and Treasury basically expects that to resume in 23-24. So a little while, there is a bit of a gap, and at the moment, net overseas migration is actually negative. The second reason was that there's a parliamentary inquiry going on into skilled migration. There's a standing House committee, I think, on migration matters, chaired by Julie and Lisa, and they released a draft report recently, and it really was a shocker, endorsing high immigration, but also very easy entry based on business needs. And so I picked that up too.
Yeah, and this is the thing about your column and the way you pick this apart, because so many in politics and in the commentary always barrack for big Australia, so that say that it's an economic no-brainer. And you argue that there are economic costs and that we can actually do okay without it.
Yeah, well, just 2 points. And you know, maybe this is a bit of a sort of fork in the road moment in the sense that I think Labor may not actually go along with this. So they put out a dissenting report with this parliamentary committee, which basically slammed the government response, the members of the committee members from the government, that report. And so I think it's an important case of watch this space, because I think if Labor decides to go on a much lower immigration trajectory compared with the government, that has really strong political implications, because we know from the surveys that the majority of people favour a lower migrant intake. Now, on the economic benefits, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think there are definitely benefits.
Yep.
But, you know, as all economists should do in their analysis, there are also costs.
Yep.
And what happens with most of the analyses, including from Treasury, that they kind of exaggerate the benefits and actually don't take into account any of the costs. And the costs are things like, you know, additional infrastructure, additional services, pressure on accommodation, congestion costs, you know, a lack of social cohesion, you know, the costs associated with dealing with, you know, there are about 1 million people in Australia now who don't speak English, and there are real costs associated with that. So I will continue to hammer that point because it's benefits and costs.
Yeah, I mean, the cost-benefit analysis is important in every field of policy. Just finally on this, Judith, when you talk about immigration, there's a lot of talk about the impact on wages. Now, even with the low immigration or non-existent immigration the past year, of course, wages have been kept low. That's because we've been smashed by the pandemic. But what impact do high levels of immigration have in the long term for Australian wages?
Well, I think you've got to think of like a really simple model. So the simple model is that you've got skilled workers, unskilled workers and capital. Now, the capital owners, business owners, they do well out of immigration, both because it's a source of labour and a source of demand for their goods and services. So capital does well. Skilled workers, they may do all right because the migrants that come in can be complementary with them. The ones And the American evidence is very clear that tend to get clobbered are the ones down at the lower end, because that's where there's a competition for jobs, right? And here's the problem. The research tells you that if you allow relatively unskilled migrants into a country like America has done, and to extent Australia, they will do jobs that Australians, the locals, will withdraw from. See, once upon a time, Australians did do farm work and the like. The trouble is that it's very, very hard, and we've seen this in the last year, to attract back those locals into those jobs. So, I'm not denying the genuine difficulties that, for example, farmers and orchard growers and the like have, because it really is difficult to get staff. But we have created a problem of our own making, in my opinion. And what I'd like the government to do is to kind of grab this by the throat and say, we can do this a different way. We can get locals to do jobs. And
we've got to find a way. It may involve paying them more as well, but there are
absolutely no problem about that at all.
Exactly.
I mean, indeed, it almost certainly will. But that, of course, is what we want: higher wages growth.
Indeed. Thanks so much for joining us, Judith. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Chris.
I think that's absolutely the point with some of those jobs. We've just got to pay people more, and people will go do them.